So you've got the UCAT coming up and you don't really know how to tackle the abstract reasoning section. Well, that's very common amongst medical school applicants. And in this video, I'm going to be giving you my top 10 tips on how I scored 800 in the UCAT many years ago when I sat it. The very first tip is to always start with the simplest box. And that's because when you're comparing set A to set B, it's always easiest to deduce the pattern to its simplest denominator. Sometimes when there's very complex multi-layered patterns, it can be very scary and put off a lot of students. And that's why you should always start with the simplest box first. Start with the simplest box in set A and the simplest box in set B and try to see what the difference might be, and also compare the simplest box in set A to other boxes in set A to see whether you can deduce any patterns. Sometimes it's also easier to start with the set B rather than set A. As English readers, we normally read from left to right, so it's very common to start with set A and then set B. But very commonly, in many of the questions that you'll face, you'll find that sometimes set B is really a lot easier than set A. And this tip I really applied when I was doing the UCAT. My next tip is to always deconstruct the pattern first. Abstract reasoning is testing your ability to see and recognize patterns, so always start with the pattern. Once you're able to deduce the pattern, it's always easier to answer the test questions. The opposite way is sometimes tried by students where they look at the test shapes first, but that doesn't really help you with answering the questions. You might get one right, you might be able to see, okay, this example here is definitely not set A or set B, but being able to answer one of the test shapes doesn't allow you to answer the rest of them. And often what examiners do is they throw red herrings. So looking at the test shape doesn't allow you in any way to understand or predict what the next test shape is and which category it falls under. Probably the most challenging aspect that students find with the abstract reasoning is the timing. So once you've nailed your pattern down, then test your hypothesis with 3 different boxes. If the pattern holds up with 3 different comparisons, then you should take a shot. Given that you have only 15 seconds roughly per test shape, testing the pattern 3 times will give you a good indicator on the likelihood of it being correct. And this is what worked for me. Personally, I don't think it's worth testing the pattern with more than 3 different boxes, just because of how limited the time that you have is. And once you get really experienced, you'll be able to recognize the pattern sometimes even with 2 comparisons. And that's where you can really shave off some of the time from your exam and to make sure that you answer all the questions. My 4th tip is to do tons of practice. And by this I mean really a lot of practice. I don't think it's possible to become an expert in abstract reasoning overnight. It is something that can definitely be prepared for. When I started off at the beginning, I found it really difficult. But once I did some practice, I was able to become familiar with what the abstract reasoning was testing for. Probably out of all UCAT sections, abstract reasoning is the one section that you want to spend as much time as possible on. You can't really take any shortcuts with it. I know that students are always stressing over what resources to use. I don't really recommend spending a lot of money and buying every resource possible online. What I would really recommend is initially using the official UCAT website. The UCAT website has 3 question banks and also has 2 complete UCAT mocks, which you can complete under timed conditions. If I was to recommend one resource, then it would probably be Medify. That's because they have a really cool interface and they have timed exams, so you can do questions under timed conditions. And that's something I'll talk about later on, but especially with abstract reasoning, you're really rushed for time. So the timed mock resources will really help you prepare. But before buying anything, try to see whether you can find anything online. I'll also have a look and see whether I can include any in the description box below that I find are helpful. And this leads on very nicely to tip 5. For the abstract reasoning, it's very important that you do enough practice to enable you to set up your own system. A good system will allow you very efficiently to go through all the different permutations of patterns that you might see. And it will really make your performance very crisp and save you a lot of time to focus on the more difficult abstract reasoning sets. One really commonly used system and a great start is SCANS. SCANS stands for shape, color, arrangement, number and size. Within shapes, you're looking for specific attributes of the shapes in set A versus set B. So this can be the angles of the shapes, or whether the shapes are regular or irregular, or whether they have any symmetry, and so on. Within color, you want to look at what the different types of shadings are for the different shapes in each of the sets. Within arrangement, you want to look at the different positioning of the different shapes in each of the sets. Are some shapes always at the top? Are others at the bottom? Are some always on the left and some always on the right? Is one shape always higher than another shape? Or are some shapes rotated clockwise or anti-clockwise? Within the number category, you're looking for anything that can be measured and differences between the different sets. This can be differences in total number of shapes, total number of a particular type of shape, total number of intersections, whether some shapes are odd always in one set or even in another set. And lastly, within size, you want to look at the relative sizes of the different shapes within set A versus set B. But again, this is just one commonly used system. For type 3 and 4 abstract reasoning questions, you want to develop your own system. How I did this when I was preparing was by writing down all the different types of questions that I came across throughout my 6 weeks of abstract reasoning practice. A few weeks before the exam, I was then able to go back through my notes and group together common themes of different types of questions that came up and what different patterns I saw. That's what worked for me, but I'd really recommend you developing your own system through your practice. Once you have your own system in place, it will really help you on test day with narrowing down all the possible answers. So I know I've been giving you lots of tips to save you time with the abstract reasoning section, but initially during your practice I really wouldn't worry about timing or to put too much pressure on yourself to stick with the 15 seconds per test item. And that's because the focus of your practice, especially at the early stages, should be to develop a system. Once you've developed a system that works for you, you can then start to become more strict on yourself and really time yourself when doing the abstract reasoning to make sure that you're finishing it in time. So early on, don't focus on the timing too much, but later on you can really start to pick up the pace and start to learn about prioritization, because that's an important skill that you'll need for the abstract reasoning section and to make sure that you do well in it. Okay, so now let's talk about timed practice. What I'd really recommend when doing timed practice is to get into the habit of flagging questions that you're not able to answer. The key is to maintain a trajectory, and you can always come back later on to answer some of the more difficult questions. If you take one thing away from this video, then I really hope it's this tip. It's very important for you to learn about tactical skipping. Since you can get 7 to 10 test items wrong and still do really well in the abstract reasoning, it's very important that you skip test items that you have a high likelihood of getting wrong. So you might be wondering, are we just throwing away these marks? Well, one important thing for you to know is that statistically, for type 1 and type 2 abstract reasoning test items, the answer is far more likely to be neither option C than it is to be set A or set B. It's a lot harder to make a test item that fits into set A or set B without making it too obvious. So my key tip is really to be tactical with skipping some of the UCAT test items. And this is why I really recommend for you to implement tactical skipping in your abstract reasoning repertoire, so you can spend more time on questions that you're more likely to actually get marks for. And also, another great benefit of this technique is that you can always come back to test items that you skip later on, and that might actually help you come up with the right answer once you look at it with fresh eyes. Tip number 9 is to really make sure that you're well rested on the day of the exam. Try meditating and get yourself into the right place. When you're not stressed and you're able to see the bigger picture, then it will really help your reasoning abilities. There's so many students each year that put a lot of pressure on themselves to do well and place so much emphasis on the UCAT in getting them into medical school. But the reality is that the UCAT only makes up one part of the medical school application. So the added pressure won't help and could even be counterproductive. So yeah, take a day or two off before the exam to make sure you're in the right frame of mind to do well. My last tip is for you to really enjoy yourself throughout this whole journey. Over the next few weeks, you'll really see yourself develop and become better at abstract reasoning. It's very daunting at the beginning, but it's a process, and as you become better at it, you'll get a lot more confident and be able to answer some of the more difficult questions more easily. And this is where you can really have fun and show off your diagnostic abilities as a future medical doctor. So I hope you found those top 10 tips really helpful, just as much as I did when I was preparing for the UCAT. If you found this video helpful, then please give this channel a subscribe and also comment in the comment section below what other videos you'd like to see.